The morning started the same way most days do. When you live in a house run by an orchid-obsessed genius who thinks walking to the front door counts as cardio. I was seated at my desk outside Wolfe's office, sorting through the morning mail and preparing to arm myself with sarcasm for our daily calendar review. Fritz was somewhere downstairs orchestrating his usual ballet in the kitchen: duck eggs, soft rolls, and a sauce that probably had more ingredients than a Wall Street contract. And then the bell rang. Not the doorbell, the kitchen bell, the little brass one Fritz uses when he's trying to send a coded message to the rest of us, usually, that something in the house is not as it should be. I took it as seriously as you would if you'd ever seen Fritz annoyed. I left the mail, past the empty office. Wolfe was upstairs whispering to his orchids and headed for the kitchen. Fritz was standing by the pantry door. He didn't speak right away. His hands were folded like he was trying to keep them from trembling, which made me glance toward the knives. "There is a jar," he said quietly. "It is not mine." I looked past him. On the lower shelf, among the regimented lines of preserves and spices, stood a glass jar, squat, green-tinted, filled with chunky pieces of cucumber floating in brine. It looked like your standard dill pickle jar, except for the fact that Fritz wouldn't be caught dead letting something store-bought anywhere near his kitchen. "You're sure?" I asked. "Could be one of yours from last summer." He shook his head once. "The lid is machine-sealed. The label is missing. And the brine contains mustard seeds. I do not use mustard seeds. Now, I've worked cases that started with a corpse in a penthouse, and some that began with a cat who didn't come home. But never once did I expect a mystery to roll in wearing the face of a misplaced pickle. Still, I've learned that when something odd shows up in the brownstone, it's usually a prelude to something worse. I carried the jar up to Wolfe's office, held it like a waiter with a rare vintage, and set it down on the corner of his desk. He was still with his orchids, so I sat in my usual chair, leaned back, and waited. At 11 o'clock sharp, the door opened and Wolfe entered. He gave the jar a glance and moved past it, like he didn't see it, which was his version of a red flag. He lowered himself into his chair, arranged his bulk into submission, and looked at me. Double quotes, "Yes?" I nodded toward the jar. "Fritz says that thing doesn't belong to him. Says it just showed up." Wolfe shifted his eyes to the offending object. "You verified it. It's not on any shelf logs. Fritz says the mustard seed is the giveaway." He grunted. Wolfe doesn't grunt often. When he does, it usually means two things. He's annoyed and he's intrigued. "Remove it. Have Sol take it to be analyzed. No fingerprints. No label. That's intentional." I raised an eyebrow. "You think it's a message?" "I think," he said, "that someone has entered this house to leave that here, in the most sacrosanct room of all, the kitchen. That makes it more than a curiosity." He closed his eyes briefly. "A jar of pickles, bereft of label, left among Fritz's own provisions, suggests malice or manipulation. I detest both." I made a mental note. Man does not detest poisoners or murderers so long as they don't step on his carpet. But if you touch his condiments, all bets are off. An hour later, I rang up Saul Panzer. He came by in his usual quiet, thundercloud way, scooped the jar into a bag, and disappeared. At 3:15, a gentleman arrived. That's what he called himself, a gentleman. His card said Lewis Mortimer Henshaw, 3-piece suit, a handkerchief that looked too white to be honest, and an expression that said he was preparing to confess to something. While pretending he WASN single quotes T. Fritz announced him and Wolfe, with more interest than usual, said to show him in Dotma. Henshaw stepped into the room, gave Wolfe a stiff nod, and another to me. He sat when instructed, straight-backed and twitchy. "I don't suppose," he said, "you found anything strange in your kitchen?" I nearly laughed. Wolfe did not. "You may proceed," Wolfe said. Henshaw opened his briefcase, pulled out a photograph, and set it on Wolfe's desk. It was an interior shot, someone's pantry. Not ours. There was an item in that pantry, he said. A jar. "That's why I'm here." And just like that, the pickle jar had a backstory. Wolfe didn't touch the photograph. He gave it a long look, then turned his eyes to Henshaw. "Before we proceed," he said coolly, "you will tell me precisely what was in the jar, how it left your possession, and why it has found its way into my home. Failure to do so will result in your immediate dismissal. And be warned, I detest lies as much as I detest mustard seed." Henshaw swallowed. I watched his Adam's apple bob like it was trying to run away. "It wasn't pickles," he said. "Finally, not originally," which, of course, was when things started getting weird. There are only two types of people who get past the vestibule and into Wolfe's office: those who don't know better and those who are worth the irritation. Lewis Mortimer Henshaw was starting to lean suspiciously into the second category, but not because he impressed Wolfe. He didn't. He was too nervous, too quick to correct his tie, and too careful with his phrasing, which to Wolfe meant he was concealing more than he was offering. He just dropped the line that what was in the pickle jar wasn't pickles, and I saw Wolfe's nostrils flare like he'd caught the scent of a fraud in full bloom. "Then, Mr. Henshaw," Wolfe said, not lifting a finger, but rearranging the atmosphere in the room, "what was it?" Henshaw opened his briefcase again, same mechanical movement, same fake confidence, and pulled out a thin manila folder. He slid it across the desk like it might explode. Wolfe didn't touch it. That was my cue. I reached for it, flipped it open, and found a typed letter, a set of photos, grayscale and grainy, and a receipt for a chemical analysis that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. The letter was from someone named E. Wren, addressed to Henshaw, and dated 3 months ago. It was a short note, something about agreeing to hold the item under specific conditions, references to temperature thresholds, and a sentence that stuck like a tack in my head. Should the jar be removed from the designated space, the contents may denature unpredictably. Wolfe exhaled slowly. "You'll explain." Henshaw nodded, but only after adjusting his cufflink. "The jar belonged to my uncle, Ezra Henshaw. He passed away 2 months ago. The item was part of his research. He was a chemist, a peculiar one, and had this belief that certain botanical compounds could preserve organic memory." I blinked. "You mean like pickled brains. He looked horrified. No, not brains. Plants. Vegetation infused with trace human protein, sweat, skin particles. Hair meant to carry emotional memory signatures. Wolfe closed his eyes. You brought this to me to indulge pseudoscientific sentimentality. No, Henshaw said quickly. Someone broke into my uncle's home after his death. The jar was taken. I received an anonymous note 2 weeks ago, saying it would return to me. I never got it. Until now. Until you found it in your kitchen. Wolfe opened his eyes again, but only halfway. You suspect someone brought it here intentionally to involve me? Henshaw hesitated. I think someone wants you to prove something, or expose something. The jar's reappearance, in your home of all places, isn't random. Wolfe frowned, which for him was a Category 5 emotional event. Mr. Goodwin, he said, show Mr. Henshaw to the front door. Mr. Henshaw, leave the folder, but you may return tomorrow at 10 if I have not dismissed this matter. By then, I stood. Henshaw stood. His protest wilted in the air like Fritz's parsley in August heat. I walked him out, politely, but with the efficiency of a man shooing a raccoon from a picnic. When I got back upstairs, Wolfe hadn't moved. The folder was still untouched. The jar was still gone with Saul, and the atmosphere had grown dense with thought. I suppose, I said, you want me to find out where Henshaw's uncle lived? How many of these emotional memory jars exist, and whether the anonymous note he mentioned came with fingerprints, dead fish, or a map to the Ark of the Covenant. That would be prudent, Wolfe murmured, but start with the woman. I paused halfway to my chair. What woman? He tapped the folder. Mr. Henshaw's papers omit one. The note is dated 3 weeks after the death. The tone is emotional, uncertain. He is not a chemist. He is not equipped to analyze the jar himself. Someone is involved, someone close, perhaps a beneficiary, a romantic entanglement, or a rival inheritor, a woman. And if it's a man? I asked. Then we'll adjust, he said. But we'll begin where instinct leads. That's Wolfe for you. He's not big on movement, but when it comes to mine's his and everyone else's, he doesn't waste a step. The brownstone hadn't had an actual intruder. No one had broken a lock or climbed in a window, but something had entered. The air had changed. Fritz was on edge. Wolfe was alert. And I had a folder with just enough weird in it to keep me from sleeping well. I spent the next hour calling through the necessary Network City records for the Henshaw estate. Old associates from Ezra's days as a research chemist in the 60s, and one particularly bored librarian in Albany, who remembered Henshaw as the man who used to mail pickle seeds to himself. By 6:30, I had a name, Esther Wren. No phone number, no address, just a note in an old university filing cabinet, listing her as a visiting researcher, disputed credentials. I knocked on Wolfe's door at dinner hour, which earned me a glare. I delivered the name anyway. Esther Wren. She's real. He nodded once. Then tomorrow, you will find her. That night, I checked the kitchen twice. The pantry shelf looked normal again. Fritz had scrubbed it down and rearranged his jars in alphabetical order. Like a general restoring order, after a mutiny. But I didn't eat the pickles with my sandwich. I figured Fritz wouldn't offer them, and even if he had, I'd still have passed. Something had been stirred, not just brine. Wolfe knew it. I knew it. And somewhere, a woman named Esther Wren was either the key to this thing or the reason we'd been dragged into it. In the first place, the next morning, at Wolfe's insistence, I hit the pavement with nothing but a name Esther Wren and a hunch. I've worked with less, not often, but enough to know that when Wolfe gives you a name without a location, it means he's either throwing you into the fire or the fire's already been lit, and you just haven't smelled the smoke yet. First stop was the NYU chemistry department, where Ezra Henshaw had taught back in the Nixon years. The department head, a stern woman named Dr. Keaton, didn't remember Ezra fondly, but did remember the drama. Odd man, she said, sipping her coffee like it was part poison, fascinated by esoteric applications of synthetic preservation. Thought he could trap personality in plants. Talked to his vines. What about Esther Wren? I asked. She raised her eyebrows. Now there's a name, not faculty. She was attached to Ezra. Not formally, more like persistent. Claimed to be a fellow researcher. Wore a lab coat like armor, but didn't belong to any institution I know of. Never published, never graduated. But she knew Ezra's routines, knew his methods. Was she family? Dr. Keaton snorted. He didn't have family. She just showed up 1 year and never left his orbit. There was talk she lived with him or near him. No one knew for sure. It was a lead. Barely dot by noon, I was ringing doorbells on East 22nd near the Henshaw townhouse. A third-floor tenant in the building next door remembered the woman in the green coat who came and went at odd hours, usually with a bag of groceries and a scowl. Esther Wren, apparently, had the kind of presence that wasn't forgettable. Her apartment, vacant now, left 3 weeks ago. No forwarding address. But the landlord still had the application. She'd filled out real name, real handwriting, and one emergency contact, Gabriel Wren. That was enough for me to call Lon Cohen. If anyone could pull strings and dig out a name from the newspaper, morgue, or a forgotten city archive, it was Lon. While he did that, I took a cab back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office with the windows closed, the thermostat set to simmer, and a tray of sliced tongue and brown mustard on rye within reach. I gave him the short version, as per usual. When I mentioned Gabriel Wren, he stirred slightly. A brother? He asked. Possibly. Could be a husband. Or a priest. No idea. HMPH. He chewed and thought at the same time, which is something only Wolfe can do with dignity. As I was about to leave the room, Fritz appeared and, in a voice low and grim, said, "You have a visitor." It was Louis Henshaw again, still nervous, still overly polished. This time, he didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped into the office and said, "You found her, didn't you?" Wolfe looked at him as if he'd stepped on a Persian rug with muddy boots. "Mr. Goodwin is pursuing leads. That is the purpose of an investigation. Your presumption is premature. She's dangerous." Henshaw said suddenly, "If you find her, stay away." Wolfe raised a brow. Then why did you come here? I came because someone broke into my apartment last night. That got my attention. Wolfe motioned for him to sit. What was taken? Nothing, Henshaw said. At least, nothing obvious. My files were disturbed. A drawer was left open. But nothing's missing. I checked everything. Wolfe turned his head slightly, eyes narrowed, or something was added. Henshaw blinked. What? A frame often begins with insertion, not removal. If someone wants to implicate you in future events, they begin by planting evidence, then wait for the situation to ripen. Henshaw looked pale. Are you suggesting I'm being set up? I'm suggesting someone wishes you to believe you are. After Henshaw left visibly shaken and mumbling something about going to stay at a hotel I made. Another call to Saul Panzer. He'd been off running tests on the mysterious pickle jar. His voice on the line was as calm as ever. It's a decoy, he said. Come again. The brine is synthetic. The contents are not cucumbers. They're slices of zucchini, dyed green with food-grade pigment. No microbial life. No spoilage. It's not edible. It's not dangerous. It's staged. He paused. And there's a small disc embedded in the bottom, just beneath the glass layer. Looks like a microchip. I let out a whistle. That wasn't in Ezra Henshaw's patent portfolio. No, Saul agreed. But it might explain why someone wants it and why they brought it to Wolfe. They want him to see it, to understand it, maybe even to decode it. That changed the stakes. We weren't dealing with stolen lunch items anymore. This was high concept. Sabotage or surveillance. When I passed the update to Wolfe, he sat back and closed his eyes again. For people, Mr. Goodwin, you will find and speak to all of them. He held up for fingers like a general issuing marching orders. 1. Esther Wren. She is primary. A woman with unknown allegiance and proximity to the object. 2. Gabriel Wren. She trusted him enough to list him as contact. He may know more than she does. 3. Dr. Keaton. Her disdain masks knowledge. Learn whether she had conflict with Ezra or ambitions regarding his research. And for... He stopped. I waited. Finally, he said, Lewis Henshaw himself. He is too eager, too scripted, either a fool or a player. So there I had it, my circle of suspects. No murder yet, no crime scene, just a jar, a broken kitchen boundary, and a cast of people with secrets fermenting just beneath their skin. At 5 p.m. Lon Cohen called back. He'd found Gabriel Wren. Worked at a tiny tech startup in Williamsburg. RFID applications, tracking sensors, microstorage. The kind of place that could hide an entire hard drive inside a paperclip and call it innovation. I made a note to visit the office in the morning, but before I could wrap up for the day, Fritz came in holding a small envelope. No return address. Delivered by hand. I opened it. Inside was a note typed on an old Remington. Just 2 lines. Stay out of the jar. Mr. Wolfe. What's preserved should stay buried. There was no signature. Wolfe read it twice, then set it aside. An appeal, or a warning, or a bluff, I said. He didn't answer. But as I stepped into the hall, I heard him mutter something not meant for me. Then let's see what decays. First, truth or silence. If there's a thrill in pounding pavement for leads. I must have lost my taste for it somewhere between the third subway transfer and the lukewarm Danish I bought from a guy who swore he used to work at Le Bernardin. But Wolfe wanted all for names chased down, and like always, that meant it was my heels on the sidewalk while he held court in his leather throne. I started with Gabriel Wren. His name hadn't popped up in anything flashy, no arrests, no scandals. Not even a late library fee, but his company, Tracelitics, had a blurb on one of those tech incubator sites about embedding human-readable data into inert matter. Fancy way of saying he played with microchips and hid them in places no one would think to look like zucchini masquerading as pickles. The Tracelitics office was a minimalist showbox above a vinyl repair shop in Williamsburg. I expected frosted glass and hushed geniuses. What I got was a man in his 30s with stubble, a hoodie, and a look that said he hadn't slept without caffeine in a decade. "You're looking for Gabriel," he said, blinking. "That's me." I introduced myself as a freelance investigator working for a private client. I didn't mention Wolfe by name. Wolfe hates premature recognition, and I try to respect the boss's delicate social ecosystem. The minute I mentioned Ezra Henshaw and Esther Wren, Gabriel's left eye twitched. He didn't play dumb, though. I gave him credit for that. "Esther's my sister," he said, and Ezra was a menace. "Strong words for a dead man," I said. "He left behind a mess." Gabriel snapped. Esther got sucked into his garbage. She thought he was some kind of visionary. She even tried to convince me to use one of his chemical formulas in our tracking gel. "Did you?" He laughed. "No, Ezra's work was barely science. He was obsessed with memory-preserving emotion like it was a jam recipe. My stuff's practical, real-world applications. He was a magician without a hat. And the jar?" I asked. "That shut him up." I leaned in. "We found one in Wolfe's home. It had a chip embedded in the base. Your handiwork?" His face went stone blank. "No, I don't embed things in produce. I don't mix business with Esther's obsessions. But you knew about it," I said. "Not until 2 weeks ago. I hadn't heard from Esther in months. Then she calls me out of nowhere asking if it's possible to hide data in something preserved. She didn't give details, just theoretical. Did you ask why? She said she couldn't explain, that she was too close. That fit with what we already knew. Esther vanished right around the time the jar appeared in our kitchen. I thanked Gabriel for his time and left him to his espresso and silence. Next stop was Dr. Marjorie Keaton. Wolfe had pegged her as suspect number 3, and if that name doesn't sound dangerous to you, you've never seen the way she looks at a man who dares to speak without raising his hand first. I met her again at her department office. And this time she didn't even offer coffee. Ezra was brilliant once, she admitted. Then he went soft. Started talking about emotional residue, as if plants could absorb grief like a sponge. Was there professional rivalry? I asked. There was professional embarrassment, she said. He published a paper once suggesting cilantro could carry the scent of memory. I nearly had to testify to the Grant Committee that we weren't harboring a cult. I smiled. So, you're not mourning his absence? I mourn what he used to be, not what he became. And Esther, she had no credentials, no degrees. She called herself a memory preservationist. That's not a field. That's a fantasy. Where is she now? Last I heard, she said with a tight frown, she was living with Ezra. After his death, she came to campus once. She asked for access to his lab notes. I refused. Why? Because they didn't belong to her. That was legally accurate, morally not. So much. But morality's never been part of a university syllabus, no matter what they print in the brochures. By mid-afternoon, I was back in the cab, plotting my final stop as to Wren herself. If I could find her, which turned out to be easier than expected, I checked the name through Wolfe's contact at the DMV, and her last known address was listed as a small building in Red Hook. I drove out, expecting a locked door and a cold trail. What I got instead was a woman standing on the stoop, feeding a stray cat and looking like she hadn't slept in a week. She spotted me before I said a word. I knew someone would come, she said. I introduced myself. She didn't seem alarmed. You work for Wolfe, she said, like it was a fact. He's the only one who'd take this seriously. I kept my tone flat. So let's talk. We sat on the steps. The cat curled around her ankle like it owned the building. I gave Ezra that jar, she said. I helped design the formula. It wasn't about pickles. It was about encoding signals into brine, micro changes in salinity and pH that could be used as a medium to transmit microdata. The chip, that was just a reader. And what was in the data? I don't know, she whispered. Ezra never told me. He said it would be safer that way. I stared. Then why bring it to Wolfe? I didn't, she said. I had the jar stored in Ezra's old cabinet after the funeral. I went to retrieve it and it was gone. A week later, I got an anonymous message. Your work deserves better protection. The jar is safe. Let him solve it. Him, meaning Wolfe? She nodded. Do you still have the message? She reached into her coat and handed me a folded page. Same Remington typeface, same rhythm, same lack of signature. That made to you. Think someone's trying to protect the research, I said. No, she said, looking up at me. I think someone's trying to expose it. I got back to the brownstone before dinner. Wolfe didn't even grunt when I entered, just waved a finger in the direction of his desk, where a legal pad was waiting. I dumped my notes, the typed message, and my impressions of Gabriel, Keaton, and Esther. When I mentioned Esther's warning, he blinked twice, so she never sent the jar. Nope. And someone else wants it seen. Seems that way. He pressed his fingers together. Someone believes the contents implicate another party. Perhaps not Esther. Perhaps not even Ezra. Someone with more to lose. And if that someone planted it here, he glanced toward the kitchen. Then they chose the most theatrical stage possible. He stood barely, just enough to reach for a book on the third shelf. He never does that unless something has stirred him. It's no longer about the jar. Mr. Goodwin. It's about the hand that placed it, which meant the real suspect hadn't even entered the circle yet. If there's one thing you can count on in the brownstone, it's that everything stays where it's supposed to. That's not just about Wolfe's delicate sense of symmetry, it's about control. Fritz's pantry is a map of culinary geography. Wolfe's books are shelved not only by author, but by the hour he last referenced them. And my own desk, while appearing like the result of a minor paper explosion, has a method behind the chaos that I'm willing to defend under oath. So when I walked into the office the next morning and noticed that the Orchid Ledger Wolfe's daily Bloom Journal was shifted to inches from where he always leaves it, I didn't need a red alarm to know something was off. I didn't move it. Fritz wouldn't dare. Theodore, our orchid man, hadn't been in yet, and Wolfe doesn't shift things. He places. I made a note of it and waited until Wolfe came down at 11. He looked at the ledger, then at me. You noticed? Yeah. Did you? Of course. At 6:15 this morning, which, translated from Wolfe, meant he hadn't slept. That's twice now. I said, once in the kitchen. Now your office. He lowered himself into the chair and adjusted his sleeves. We are being visited. You're sure it wasn't Saul? Or even Henshaw? No. Saul would not violate routine, and Mr. Henshaw hasn't. The goal? Then someone's got a key. Not possible, he replied. The locks have not been tampered with, and I changed the tumblers myself 6 months ago. I raised my brows. You changed the locks? Yes, Mr. Goodwin. Contrary to your theatrical skepticism, I am not wholly sedentary. Occasionally, necessity demands action. I made a mental note to investigate the day Wolfe broke a sweat. For now, I focused on the trespass. Nothing else touched. He shook his head. But the ledger's placement was precise. A signal. To you? He nodded. To confirm they were here. Without confrontation. Without damage. To warn you? No, he said. To show they can. That was worse. A person who breaks in to steal something is after value. A person who breaks in just to touch something is after dominance. Wolfe rang for Fritz, who appeared in less than a minute. The pantry had been untouched overnight. The kitchen door had been locked from the inside. I asked Fritz if he had noticed anything out of place since the jar incident. He hesitated, then said, 2 of my spice jars were misaligned yesterday. I assumed I had placed them carelessly. Now, I do not. Which ones? Sumac and ground caraway. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Both red-capped, both similar in size. Unmistakable if reversed. So now we had 3 incidents. The pickle jar's rival, the moved ledger, and the swapped spice jars. I called Saul. Panzer, you ever visit the house the night before the jar showed up? I asked. No. Anyone in your tail net lately? You notice washers? No. But that doesn't mean they're amateurs. It just means they're good after hanging up. I took a trip downstairs and reviewed the locks myself. No damage. No scrapes. Nothing forced. The windows were sealed. The dumbwaiter hadn't moved. But the signals were real. Someone had been here. And they wanted Wolfe to know at noon. A package arrived. No return address. No postage. Just brown paper and string, left at the front door. I opened it while Wolfe watched. Inside, a single rubber glove and a sealed note typed, "Of course, you're close, but your house is full of noise. Listen to what was never opened." I passed the glove to Wolfe. He held it up like a relic. "The left hand," he said. "Unused. New. Message in that. Several," he said. "But I will wait for the fourth." "Fourth what?" "Fourth intrusion. The trespasser leaves them intentionally. A sequence. The jar, the ledger, the pantry, the glove. 4 corners of the house, for signals. And after that, he didn't answer at 2:30. I had another call, this one from Lon Cohen. "I did some background on Ezra's estate," Lon said. "Turns out the property was contested." "Contested how?" "An old will. Filed but never executed. It listed someone other than Lewis Henshaw as beneficiary." "Who?" "A man named Felix Gable. No relation, just a name. That was new. Felix Gable didn't come up in any of the interviews. Not from Esther. Not from Gabriel. Not from Keaton. And certainly not from Lewis Henshaw, who'd been playing the grieving nephew card a little too well." I told Wolfe. He tapped his pen. "Once. That's the name. That's who's missing from the circle. Should I find him?" "No," Wolfe said. "He will come." "How do you know?" "Because the message said we're close, which means someone is watching. And if they are watching, they already know we've discovered Gable. The next move will be his." That night, I checked the pantry one more time. The sumac and caraway were back where they belonged. No new intrusions, no new signals. But I didn't sleep easy, because Wolfe was right. The trespasser hadn't come for something, they'd come to stage something. And when a man enters a house not to steal, but to arrange, it means one thing: the scene hasn't happened yet, and when it does, we're not solving a crime. We're inside it. When Wolfe says someone will come, they do. It's not prophecy. It's physics. Pressure builds, conditions change, and the human tendency to act usually foolishly takes over. That morning, I didn't bother with the mail. I sat at my desk with the phone in arm's reach and both eyes on the front door. By 11:15, the bell rang. The man at the threshold introduced himself with a name that didn't match anything in our file yet. Felix Gable. Wolfe hadn't just been right, he'd been precise. Gable was in his late 40s, thin, sharp-eyed, and dressed like he wasn't sure if he was coming to confess or propose a merger. He held a leather briefcase, like it was made of glass. I didn't ask who sent him. I didn't need to. I just stepped aside and waved him in. Wolfe didn't rise when he entered. That would have suggested curiosity. He simply pointed to the red chair and waited until Gable sat down before opening his mouth. "You were expected," Wolfe said. Gable gave a half-smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to disguise fear as charm. "I suppose I should be flattered. I find flattery burdensome. Proceed." Gable placed the briefcase on his knees. "I'm not here to confess anything, just to clarify a few things. You're the man listed in Ezra Henshaw's earlier will," I said, stepping forward. "You were going to inherit the property. Until Lewis Henshaw surfaced with a newer document. Gable nodded. Ezra changed his mind shortly before he died. He never told me why. He just said, "It's all noise now. I'm sealing it away." "What does that mean?" Wolfe asked. I assumed he was talking about his research. He grew paranoid near the end. Thought people were tracking him, listening to him through walls. Esther was the only one he trusted. And yet, Wolfe said, "You came here unprompted, carrying a briefcase. You are not here to share grief." Gable hesitated, then unclasped the case. Inside was a folder, a thumb drive, and a small black object wrapped in cloth. He placed the cloth on Wolfe's desk and unwrapped it. Another jar. This, one smaller, amber glass, same shape, no label. The lid had a hand-painted mark on it, a tiny green triangle with a circle inside. "This was the original," Gable said. "The prototype. I stole it from Ezra's lab 2 years ago." Wolfe didn't blink. Why? Because I thought it was nonsense. Harmless. I wanted to prove it didn't work. I figured if I replicated his process and got nothing, I could convince him to stop wasting money and time. But it did work, I asked. Gable didn't answer directly. He opened the folder and pulled out a typed pager sequence of coordinates, times, and symbols. It responded to environmental shifts, temperature, light, humidity. The chip inside changed data based on external conditions. It's like a living file, self-modifying, Wolfe said. "Yes. Where is the reader?" "I don't have it. That's why I came. I think someone else does. And I think they're trying to use your house to finish Ezra's experiment." I stepped back. Wolfe leaned forward an inch, maybe less, for him. "That's shouting. You believe your theft triggered this sequence of events?" "No," Gable said. "I believe someone else knew I stole the jar, and they used that as leverage to force me out of the will, to put Lewis in instead, and to erase any record that I was involved. They don't care about the inheritance. They care about the research. And who is they, Mr. Gable?" "I don't know. I never met them. I only got messages, notes, just like you." I pulled out our own copy of the anonymous warning. Gable glanced at it and nodded. Same typeface, same phrasing. I got 4 of those over the last year. Each more specific than the last. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "You should have come earlier. I was afraid." Wolfe shut his eyes. Cowardice is often more dangerous than malice. That ended the conversation. Gable left the jar, the paper, and the drive. Wolfe didn't touch them. I took them to the safe and locked them in. At 3 o'clock. Fritz called me to the kitchen. "Something's been moved again," he said, voice tight. This time, it wasn't the spice rack. It was the drawer under the main butcher block. One of the knives Fritz's oldest, dullest, used only to crush garlic was missing. I checked every drawer, every cutting board. Nothing. Wolfe was furious not because of the missing knife, but because someone had come and gone again without being seen. "They're accelerating," he said. "They've tested the perimeter, proven their access, and now they're altering the environment." "And the message?" I asked. He turned to me. "They want us to find something. We had no clue what. But that night, at 8:40 p.m., Saul called with a break. I reviewed the chip in the first jar again. He said, "It's not just data. It's directional. Embedded code pointing to physical coordinates. Where? Brooklyn. Industrial. Park. Old textile mill near the East River." I hung up, told Wolfe, and got my coat. "I'll go now," I said. "No," Wolfe said. "You will wait until daylight." "Why?" "Because the message said to listen to what was never opened. We have opened too much, too fast. Let them move again. Let them show their hand. And if they don't, then we will move. But not until we've seen the pattern complete. At midnight, another envelope arrived. No glove this time. Just a single photograph, black and white, blurry, taken through glass. It was me, sitting at my desk, reading Wolfe's ledger, taken from inside the brownstone, from upstairs. Being photographed from inside your own house without knowing it, especially when you work for a man who could outthink a chess grandmaster blindfolded, isn't the kind of thing that makes you feel special. It makes you feel like a sap. I faced armed killers, crooked cops, and billionaires who thought subtlety was for the poor. But this was something different. Whoever was playing this game didn't want us dead or exposed. They wanted us engaged. Wolfe spent the morning in silence, not brooding, calculating. He stayed in his chair, barely moving, eyes fixed on a corner of the room no one else would bother to look at. I'd seen that look before. It meant he wasn't just thinking. He was arranging. At 9:47 a.m. he rang for me. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "You will call Mr. Panzer. I want eyes on 3 locations." I took out my notebook. 1. The Brooklyn textile mill Mr. Panzer identified. 2. The Henshaw apartment. And 3. The hallway upstairs. "Upstairs?" I asked. "Yes, near the west-facing window." Someone stood there. The photograph was taken through that glass. "I want to know if they return." Why would they? To ensure we've seen the picture, or to plant something more? I rang Saul and gave him the list. He didn't ask questions. He never does. By noon, Wolfe had moved into position, verbal position, not physical. He began calling in markers. First was Lon Cohen, who agreed to search for records off the book university funding tied to Ezra Henshaw or his lab. Then he contacted Inspector Kramer. That was rare. Wolfe doesn't love the police. Kramer doesn't love Wolfe. But mutual annoyance has its uses. "Tell him," Wolfe instructed me, "that there may be a breach involving classified material. Biological in origin, possibly misappropriated." "Is it?" I asked. "I don't know," Wolfe said. "And neither will he. That's the point. He will stir the pot. I want movement." At 1 p.m., Saul reported in. The textile mill was empty, but had recent footprints near a broken rear door, fresh as of last night. No surveillance, no alarms, a perfect place for a hidden exchange. The Henshaw apartment, meanwhile, had someone watching it, a woman with a yellow scarf and a cheap pair of binoculars. She left before Saul could idea. And the brownstones upstairs window? I found a print on the outside sill, Saul said. worn glove, left hand, matches the one in the box. That confirmed it. The photo wasn't old. It wasn't symbolic. Someone had been inside within the last 48 hours, and they'd left. The photo to prove it, not to scare us, not even to manipulate, to pull Wolfe into position. At 3:15, Wolfe summoned me again. "Mr. Goodwin, the fourth corner is complete. The intrusions jar, pantry, ledger, knife each altered a part of this house." Then the message: "Listen to what was never opened." And the photograph confirms it. Confirms what? That we are the experiment now. That hit hard. Wolfe hates being the subject of anything. He prefers to observe, not to participate. He hates surprises, symbolism, and anyone who uses metaphors without a license. You think we're being watched to test the jars? I think someone is measuring our reactions the way one might measure chemical responses. Our fear, our hesitation, our decisions. Everything we've done has been within their expected parameters. Even this conversation, perhaps, I didn't. Like that, I don't like being predictable. Then let's flip the board, I said, precisely. Wolfe ordered Saul to send a single message to Esther Wren, delivered by hand, simple, blunt, and designed to provoke. You did not send the jar, but you knew what it would do. Come now, or we will bring the house down on your name. The phrasing was classic Wolfe, vague enough to deny intent, direct enough to draw blood. At 6:30 p.m. The front bell rang. Esther stood in the doorway. No coat, no bag, just the look of someone who'd been waiting for the summons without knowing it. "I'll talk," she said. Wolfe didn't say a word. He just motioned her in. She sat, calm. No eye contact. No tremble. That scared me more than if she'd been hysterical. "I didn't build the network," she said. "I just followed Ezra's notes. He wanted the jars to carry emotional traces. I figured out they could also receive them. Explain," Wolfe said. "Data isn't just numbers. It's behavior. Ezra thought emotion could trigger responses in material heat signatures. Pulse proximity. We started testing with brined samples because they retained molecular stability. The chips inside, they weren't just storing data, they were listening. The jars don't just hold information, they learn. From what?" I asked. "From us," she said. "Where they're placed, what's near them, how people react when they're moved. It's behavioral input. They register threat, trust, repetition." Wolfe sat back. "You created adaptive surveillance." "Yes," she whispered. "But I didn't weaponize it. Someone else did." "And who was that?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Ezra never said. But someone approached him before he died, offered funding, said they could take his work to the next level. He refused. Then weeks later, he was dead." "Was it murder?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. He died in his sleep. But the jar disappeared that same night." Wolfe tapped the armrest. "Then they didn't need Ezra. They needed the prototype." Esther nodded. "And now they're using us to see how it works. To see how long it takes the smartest man in the city," she said, glancing at Wolfe, "to realize he's being monitored." For once, Wolfe didn't object to flattery. He turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, You will invite all for suspects, Lewis. Henshaw, Dr. Keaton, Gabriel Wren, and Mr. Gable here tomorrow. Noon. What's the bait? I asked. Wolfe gave a rare, thin smile. Tell them we've cracked the jar. And if they ask what it said, tell them it revealed everything. And what do we actually know? I asked. Wolfe looked down at the amber jar, sitting in the center of his desk like a second sun. Very little, he said. But soon enough, we'll know how they behave. When they think it's over, which, in this business, is always when things are just getting good. When you tell for people with tangled motives that the secret's been cracked. You can't be surprised when they all show up early and try to act casual. By 11:30, we had a full pre-show, Lewis Henshaw pacing in the front hall like a man waiting to collect a will. Dr. Keaton seated stiff-backed in the dining room sipping Fritz's tea. Like it was arsenic, Gabriel Wren staring too long at the orchid wall, and Felix Gable whispering to himself by the coat stand. Wolfe, of course, didn't adjust his routine by a second. At 11:59, he entered the office, settled into his chair, and gave me the nod. I ushered them in one by one. 4 suspects, 1 silent jar. One detective who hadn't left his chair in weeks and was about to gut them all, with nothing but logic and restraint. When they were seated, Henshaw left, Keaton beside him, Gable across from her, and Gabriel on the far end. Wolfe opened his eyes. You are all here, he said, because the truth has arrived ahead of you. I invited you not for assistance, but to witness the disclosure. There was a silent state. Surgical. Gabriel Wren broke first. Are you saying the jar said something? Wolfe folded his hands. The jar said nothing. It recorded everything. That got them squirming. Henshaw coughed. Gable sat forward. Keaton's eyes narrowed. Wolfe went on. This case began when a foreign object was placed in my pantry. It pretended to be pickles. It was not. What it still is a medium, a conduit, a mirror. Doctor. Keaton scoffed. That's poetic nonsense. No, Wolfe said. That's scientific theft. Her eyes narrowed. Wolfe turned slightly toward her. Dr. Keaton, you claimed disdain for Ezra Henshaw's work. Yet, after his death, you attempted to acquire his notes through back channels. I have the communication logs. She didn't deny it. He wasted his potential. I wanted to see if he had hidden something worthwhile before it was auctioned off by amateurs. Gabriel leaned forward. He did hide something. He told me before he died someone had approached him. A buyer. Someone willing to fund a second stage. He said it scared him. Wolfe turned toward Gabriel now. You're his sister. Yet you claim you had no involvement after the original prototype. I didn't, she snapped. I only realized what they'd done when I saw the jar missing. I never meant for this to go beyond theory. Felix Gable gave a dry laugh. Theory? You don't embed micro-adaptive surveillance in a jar because you're curious. You do it because you want a weapon that doesn't look like a weapon. Wolfe raised a finger. Indeed, Mr. Gable, you would know. You stole the first jar, not to expose Ezra but to monetize his process. Gable froze. That's not true. You stole it to discredit him. Wolfe continued. But when you realized the potential, You kept it, hid it, hoping the inheritance would pass to you when it didn't. You panicked. You feared exposure. Gable turned red. That's speculation. Wolfe shook his head once. No, it's deduction. The print on the second jar's cloth wrapping matches a glove you discarded at the textile mill. Saul Panzer retrieved it this morning. That was news to me. Wolfe hadn't told me Saul had gone back, Mr. Henshaw. Wolfe said now, turning to the twitching man beside Keaton. You're the beneficiary of a revised will. A man with no scientific training, no relationship with Ezra, and no discernible qualification other than being his nearest legal heir. I didn't ask for any of this, Lewis said, voice tight. I was told I'd been named. That's it. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. You were told. Someone pushed Ezra to change his will. Someone who needed a compliant name. A placeholder. Are you accusing me? No, Wolfe said. You were a pawn. Silence. Everyone waited. Wolfe let them. The central question, he continued, is not who built the jar, nor who possessed it. The question is why it was brought to me. Why disrupt my home? Why stage a performance across the pantry, the office, and the drawer? The answer is simple. He pointed to the amber jar on his desk. They needed someone to activate it. Dr. Keaton frowned. Activate? Wolfe inclined his head. The jar was designed to respond to its environment. Its data shifted based on observation. That was its flaw. It could not stabilize unless it encountered consistent stimuli. In other words, truth. Gabriel Wren blinked. So by watching it, you calibrated it, Wolfe said. You forced it into coherence, and in doing so, you exposed yourself. To who? Keaton asked sharply. Wolfe looked at her. To whoever is watching now. I stepped to the side and opened the hallway door. Saul Panzer entered, holding a tablet. East-facing window, Saul said. Infrared confirmed. Someone across the street has been scanning us for days. The jar's emissions led us to them. Gable stood. You're saying someone's recording US right now? Wolfe nodded. And soon they'll come to retrieve the data. Lewis Henshaw leaned forward. So who is it? Who sent the jar? Wolfe took a long breath. A shell organization. Not one of you. Not even Ezra. The goal was always to test behavior. Not in a lab, but in a house where people speak freely, argue, hesitate, betray. My house. He turned to Keaton again. You wanted Ezra's research, but you couldn't make it function. Gabriel provided the theory. Gable the theft. Henshaw the cover. But only one environment could generate real results. He tapped the jar. Mine. No one spoke. The weight of it landed slowly. Wolfe had never been the detective on the case. He'd been the subject. And now that he knew it, he controlled it. Mr. Panzer will handle the surveillance team, Wolfe said. The data will be extracted, catalogued, and removed. This experiment is over. But know this. He looked at all of them, calm as stone. Your actions are preserved. Not just in brine or silicon, but in the choices you made when you believed you were unwatched. He stood just barely, but enough to dominate. The room. Leave. One by one, they did. I closed the door behind the last of them. The office was silent again. Wolfe sat, Mr. Goodwin, he said, destroy the jar. I didn't ask twice, and with that, the brownstone began to exhale again. Almost, there are two kinds of endings in this business. The ones where everything explodes in your face, and the ones where everything's already exploded. And your job is just to sweep the debris into a neat little pile. Wolfe prefers the latter. He doesn't like noise. He doesn't like surprises. What he does like is revelation. Not confession, not evidence revelation. The kind that makes everyone in the room sit back and realize they've been inside a story, written by someone else the whole time. And now, the story had turned. The four suspects had left the brownstone in various stages of discomfort. Keaton, stone-faced and tight-lipped, Gable muttering to himself, Gabriel Wren unusually silent, and Lewis Henshaw looking like he'd just realized he wasn't the main character. Saul had already crossed the street and dealt with the surveillance unit. Confirming Wolfe's theory, the building opposite us had been leased anonymously. Cameras set up in a dark room aimed directly at our office window, capturing us all like a theater audience. The observer had no name on the lease, no traceable identity. Whoever set this up was careful, which meant they were never meant to be seen, only understood. That night, Wolfe didn't speak much. He gave me one instruction: destroy the jar. I did, carefully, not because I was worried it would fight back, but because anything that's watched you watch it for 2 weeks deserves a cautious goodbye. I took it to a secure disposal facility Saul recommended. Under bright fluorescent light, I placed it in an industrial-grade deconstructor, something built to shred electronics and dissolve composites. When the machine finished, there was nothing left but powder and residue. No chip, no brine, no trace of the eye that had been staring at us from inside. When I came back, Wolfe was in the plant room. He was talking to the orchids, which was his way of returning to normal. Fritz was in the kitchen chopping onions with the same knife that had gone missing and then reappeared 2 days later, clean, dry, resting in the sink like it had never left. Things had reset, or tried to, but the reveal wasn't done, because the next morning a package arrived. No return address, no postage, just like before. Brown paper, twine, light. Inside, a single Polaroid. This time, it wasn't me. It was Wolfe. Not recent at least not obviously. He was younger, maybe 10 years ago, sitting in his chair, same position, same scowl, and on the back of the photograph, a handwritten line in small, careful print. This didn't start with the jar. I brought it to Wolfe. He looked at it, then closed his eyes. Of course, he said. Of course it didn't. That's when he opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a thin, red file I'd never seen before. Wolfe doesn't keep secrets from me, not out of love, but out of utility. But this one, apparently, had stayed put. He handed it to me. Inside was 6 documents, notes, memos, and a grainy image of a lab table covered in glass samples. The name on all the paperwork, Project Lamina. You remember the Donovan case? He asked. I did. Barely. 3 years ago, a biotech scandal involving lab-grown memory tissues. It made headlines for a week, and then vanished when the primary witness recanted and the money disappeared. This, Wolfe said, tapping the folder, was part of it. Ezra Henshaw consulted on that project, briefly, before resigning. Why? Because he disagreed with the direction. They wanted application. He wanted philosophy. That figured. Wolfe had always said scientists break two ways: the ones who build tools and the ones who ask why tools should be built. Someone picked up the pieces. He said, used Henshaw's early notes, refined them, built the jars, and used us to complete the loop. He nodded. What better control group than a detective who notices everything? I flipped through the papers again. One stood out: an internal memo from a company that no longer officially existed. Signed only with initials, E.K. Keaton. I said aloud, she never left the research, Wolfe said. She just buried it. It all clicked then. Keaton had funded the development. Gable had stolen the early prototype and gone rogue. Gabriel had tried to bury it in academia. Henshaw had been inserted to cover tracks. And Esther was the one person who actually believed in the principle, but not in the manipulation. Wolfe had pieced it all together without leaving the chair. They brought the jar here, I said, because they knew you'd solve it. No, Wolfe corrected. They brought the jar here because they hadn't solved it. They needed someone to do it for them. And now, he said, they'll cover it up, destroy the data. Already done. Come after us. No, he said, with that faint curl of smug certainty. We're no longer useful. He leaned back, but I suspect they'll be watching again. Eventually, somewhere else, with another object, another place, another subject. The experiment doesn't end. It just moves. I looked down at the photo of him, the one someone took without his knowledge, years ago, long before this began. How long have they been observing? He met my eyes. Longer than we like to think. I slipped the file back into his drawer. So, what now? He reached for the bell, rang for Fritz, and said, dinner. That was the sign. The case was done. The world, such as it is, would continue. But as we sat at the table in with his trout Amandine, me with a beer and 1,000 thoughts, I knew something had shifted, not just in the brownstone, but around it. This hadn't been a case of murder, theft, or betrayal. It had been a case of intrusion, intellectual, moral, personal. And while Wolfe had emerged unbroken, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been part of something larger, something unfinished. As I cleared the table, I caught Wolfe looking out the window. What are you thinking? I asked. He didn't. Look at me. I'm thinking, he said softly, about all the things in this house that have never been opened. And that was Wolfe, still watching, still being watched, still one step ahead. When a case ends, there's supposed to be a sense of closure, paperwork done, people either cuffed or cleared, and the world returned to its usual crooked rhythm. But this one didn't feel like that. Not to me. Not to Wolfe. It didn't even feel like an ending. It felt like a pause, like we'd stepped off a moving train, and it kept going without us. Wolfe resumed his schedule like nothing happened. Breakfast, orchids, books, lunch. and absolute refusal to engage in any activity that might be described as energetic. Fritz recovered faster than I did. By the end of the week, he was humming in the kitchen again, though he did toss out every preserved item in the pantry and start over, even the good paprika. Me, I kept checking the windows. Not because I thought someone was watching, but because I knew someone had been. And if they'd done it once, they could do it again. The investigation had technically ended with Saul dismantling the surveillance nest across the street. The jar was gone, pulverized and disposed of. The notes from Ezra's work were in Wolfe's safe, and a discreet visit from Inspector Kramer a day later had confirmed what we already knew. No crime had technically been committed. There were no charges, no arrests, nothing tangible, just interference, a long con, a quiet experiment in a loud world. But the real aftermath, the one that mattered, happened in Wolfe's office. It started with a visitor I didn't expect. Esther Wren returned. She didn't ring. She knocked. Wolfe hesitated before allowing her in, which meant he was weighing something. Not risk, not danger, something else, curiosity. He rarely indulged it. "I need to know," she said, standing in front of his desk. How much of what Ezra believed was true? Wolfe didn't answer at first. Then he pointed to the orchid beside him, a rare, delicate hybrid that required more care than most people give to their children. "That flower," he said, "responds to vibration, temperature, and tone. It grows differently depending on the hand that tends it. You may call it biological responsiveness. Ezra called it memory." She nodded, absorbing it. "So it wasn't all fantasy?" "No," Wolfe said. But his application was corrupted. Not by ambition, by interference. She looked tired, not beaten, just drained. "I'm leaving," she said, "getting away from all of it. Ezra, the research, the questions." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Will that help?" She smiled faintly. "No, but it will give me distance." He didn't wish her well. He simply inclined his head, which, for him, was permission to disappear. After she left, I asked the obvious. "You believe her?" "Largely," he said, "but not entirely." "Why not?" "Because anyone who builds a thing to listen does so for one reason: to hear something they cannot let go of. That stuck with me. Still does." A few days later, we received another package. No surprise there. No handwriting this time, just a plain envelope, no name. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, standard font, plain margins, and one sentence: "Control is not observation. Control is the expectation of how one will behave when being observed." I read it aloud. Wolfe didn't move. "They're not done," I said. "No," Wolfe replied, "but we are." It wasn't resignation. It wasn't surrender. It was clarity. Wolfe had played the game, drawn out the players, stripped the mystery bare. There was nothing else to extract. Whoever was behind the larger web, the anonymous funders, the experiment designers, the architects of the whole bizarre pickle jar plot, would move on to their next test subjects. Because that's how these things work. When you run a controlled study, you don't stay in one place. And when you lose control of it, you burn the notes and disappear. We didn't see Gable again, or Gabriel Wren, or Keaton, or even Lewis Henshaw, who I suspect was quietly paid off to shut up and walk away. I kept tabs on them for a week or two, but they all vanished into the city like ink into water. Wolfe filed the red folder back into the safe. He wrote no report. He sent no invoice. The only item left from the case aside from memory was a single glove, still sitting on the mantelpiece where I'd put it days earlier. Why keep it? I asked one evening. He glanced at it, then returned to his book. To remember, he said. That was all. And I understood, because what we'd faced wasn't a villain in the usual sense. It wasn't blackmail or revenge or blood spilled on tile. It was a violation of privacy, of thought, of certainty. Something slipped past our defenses and rewrote the rules from inside the house. And Wolfe, who values order the way most men value oxygen, had been made a part of the experiment against. His will dot he didn't say it aloud, but I know that cut deeper than any knife. The brownstone returned to its sacred quiet. The pantry was clean. The office smelled like polish and paper. The orchids bloomed. Fritz cooked. Wolfe sat. I watched. But somewhere out there beyond our corner of West 35th Street, someone else was planting another jar in another home, under another shelf. And I knew this wasn't the last time we'd hear from them, because experiments end. But the need to control, that always finds a new subject.